My name is Maren Kessler. I was 33 years old the afternoon my younger sister strolled onto my hospital floor like she'd been hired to redecorate it. I was elbow deep in a chart at the nurse's station in Spokane when I caught the sound of her laugh drifting down the corridor, that same bright, rehearsed laugh I'd have recognized in a crowded stadium. My stomach dropped before my mind even finished the thought. Paige. 1900 miles from the house we grew up in, and somehow still close enough to reach me. We were raised under the same roof, my sister and I. And yet I spent every single holiday of my childhood inside that house feeling like a guest who'd overstayed her welcome. What she asked of me 2 months later would end up costing me the one thing I'd clawed together with my own 2 hands over the better part of a decade. If you're new here, welcome to Quiet Reckonings, the channel where we talk about the family wounds nobody puts on a Christmas card, and the people who finally decide they're done bleeding for an audience. Hit subscribe, and drop a comment if any of this sounds familiar, because I have a feeling it will. Before I tell you what she did, I need you to understand what she was walking into, because it wasn't some small, easily replaced thing. It took me 7 years to build. I arrived in Washington State at 26 with $300, a fresh nursing license, and not a single soul who knew my middle name. I slept on a mattress on the floor of a studio apartment above a laundromat for the first 4 months. I volunteered for every overnight shift nobody else wanted. I studied that ICU the way some people study a second language, until I could read a monitor before it finished its first alarm, until the attending started waiting for my read on a patient before they trusted their own labs. Ruth Calloway trained me my first winter on the floor, and somewhere in that year she became the closest thing to a mother I'd had in longer than I wanted to admit. Dr. Whitfield, our lead intensivist, once told a room full of residents that when Maren Kessler says a patient is crashing, you don't ask questions, you move. I earned that sentence one exhausted double shift at a time. Nobody ever handed it to me the way they handed my sister things. I built it from nothing, alone, on purpose. Because here's the part my family never once said out loud, not directly, not where it could be pinned down and argued with, there was always room at the table for Paige. For me, there was a chair folded up and left by the back door. I never told anyone in Spokane about the folding chair. Not about the years of watching from an upstairs window while everyone else piled into the car. I just worked. I got sharp. I got quiet. I got free. And for 7 years, that arrangement held together beautifully. Then, on an ordinary Tuesday, a woman from Human Resources walked a new hire down my hallway for introductions, heels clicking against the tile, and the new hire turned around, and it was my sister, smiling at me the way you'd smile at a photograph you'd been chasing for years and had finally caught up to. You would think a family that left one daughter behind, over and over, would at least need a decent excuse each time. Mine never bothered keeping their stories straight. When I was 8, it was that I got carsick, so I stayed with the neighbors while everyone else drove up to the cabin. At 11, the tickets to the amusement park only came in packs of 3, and surely I wouldn't want to be the odd one out, so I became the odd one out, alone in my bedroom. At 14, it was money, which never quite explained how Paige ended up at a summer camp that same June. There was always a reason. Each reason, taken by itself, sounded almost fair. That was the cruelty of it, you cannot argue with a thing that sounds reasonable. If I got upset, I was being dramatic. If I asked why, I was stirring up trouble. My father had a phrase for it, Maren, don't upset your mother. As if her comfort were the fragile object in the room, and not the 12-year-old quietly absorbing the lesson that she came second in her own household. None of this was really Paige's doing. She was 4 years younger than me, and she simply lived inside the warm half of the house the way a person lives inside whatever climate they were born into, without noticing it, without ever needing to. She didn't know there was a chair by the back door. She'd never once had to sit in it. So when people eventually ask me why I don't just call my sister and clear the air, I want to explain that the air was never really the issue. The foundation of that house was poured crooked before either of us learned to walk. You don't sweep up a slanted floor. You leave the building. The HR woman was still mid-introduction when the ground opened beneath me. Maren, this is Paige Whitmore, our new Director of Patient Experience. She'll be working across departments on culture and service quality. Whitmore, she'd taken her husband's name. For one blessed second I let myself believe it might be some other Paige, some cosmic coincidence. Then she said, brightly, actually, we already know each other, and her smile widened, and she added, this is my big sister. I watched every nurse at that station quietly file the information away for later. Director of Patient Experience. I turned the title over in my mind like I was reading a strip of cardiac rhythm, looking for the arrhythmia. Patient experience sat over every unit on anything touching culture, which meant, in the org chart nobody says out loud, my sister now had a direct line into how my work would be judged. I kept my expression level. I've kept my expression level over a coding patient with a family screaming behind me. I could manage this. Welcome to Spokane, I said, and shook her hand like she was a vendor pitching new equipment. Her palm was soft. Mine had 2 years of hospital-grade sanitizer baked into the skin. I had no idea you were even out here, she said, all wonder and warmth. And I nearly believed the surprise, because underneath the warmth sat a small, satisfied stillness, the particular look of someone who has just found the final page of a book they'd been hunting for years. She might not have known the exact floor or the exact shift. But you don't take a job 1,900 miles from home and stumble by accident onto the one relative living in that city. She'd known the town. She'd known the hospital. She'd known enough. I smiled, went back to my charting, and my hands did not shake, and I let myself count that as a small, cold win. By the end of that first week, there was already a story about us circulating, and I hadn't agreed to a single word of it. Paige told it in the break room, to Ruth, to the charge nurses, to a first-year resident who didn't know any better. Maren and I sort of drifted apart for a while, she'd say, light as tissue paper, and then, can you believe it, the universe just puts us in the same building. Drifted, like a canoe untied from a dock. She'd rest a hand on my shoulder every time she told it in front of an audience, and I couldn't shake her off without becoming the difficult one in the scene. That's the part nobody warns you about. Once someone builds a pleasant little story around you in public, refusing to play your part makes you the villain. She called me a sis in front of the whole unit, and the whole unit melted a little, because it's a sweet thing to witness, 2 sisters, reunited by chance. And underneath my ribs, the old machinery groaned back to life, the machinery that whispers, your job is to make this look good for her. I watched Ruth soften toward Paige over the course of 3 days. Ruth, who had been mine. She seems like such a lovely person, Ruth said to me one afternoon, and I just nodded and charted a pain score, because the alternative was explaining an entire childhood in a hospital corridor. The stage had gone up. The lights were warm. And I'd been cast, without a single audition, right back into the exact role I had driven across the country specifically to resign from. Here's what made it worse, for the first time in years, I actually wanted something out loud. The ICU nurse manager position had opened up when our longtime manager retired, and Dr. Whitfield had cornered me by the medication cart. Apply, he said. Don't argue with me. I don't usually let a compliment go unchallenged. I let that one stand. I wanted it, not the title, which I could take or leave, but the authority. I wanted to build a schedule that didn't grind people into the ground. I wanted to hire nurses who would actually stay. I wanted to formally run the unit I had already been quietly running for 2 years while somebody else got the corner office. It was mine to earn, and for once I could feel it within reach. And wanting something within reach is a dangerous position, because it means exposing your whole side. The manager decision would go through a review panel, and the panel weighed culture scores and patient experience metrics, and you already know exactly whose department those numbers belong to. I told myself it wouldn't matter. Competence is competence. My unit's numbers were strong because I had made them strong, night after night, one hard decision at a time. But I had grown up learning that being the most deserving person in a room does not guarantee you a seat in the car. In my family, merit was never the currency that mattered. Proximity was the currency. Ease was the currency. Being effortlessly lovable in the moment beat being quietly right over the long haul, every single time. And now the woman who had always been effortlessly lovable was 3 doors down the hall, holding a badge that gave her a vote in my future. I submitted my application that same afternoon. It felt like handing someone a loaded weapon and asking them to be careful with it. That night, my mother texted me for the first time in 7 years. I know it was the first time because her old messages were still sitting untouched at the top of my phone, a gray wall of the last things she'd ever said to me back when I was 26 and packing boxes. Her new message sat right on top of all of it, casual as anything. Paige told us where you ended up. We're going to come visit. Your father misses you so much. Love, Mom. I stood in my kitchen and read it with the refrigerator humming behind me. I had never given my parents my address. I had never told them my city. I had built an entire second life on the deliberate foundation of them not knowing where the door was. And my sister had handed them a map inside her second week on the job. Your father misses you so much. Not I'm sorry. Not we were wrong. Not we've thought about that Thanksgiving every year since and it still sits wrong in my chest. Just, we're coming, and you'll host the feeling the way you always host the feeling. I set the phone face down on the counter. Then I flipped it back over and read it again, because that's the strange thing about a wound that old, some part of you still leans toward the voice that made it. Part of me, 33 years old with a good career and clean scrubs, turned into an 8-year-old again for one full second, hoping this was finally the year they'd booked a 4th ticket. I hated that part of myself. I had spent so much money and so many miles trying to starve it out. And there it still was, alive, tilting toward my mother's text like a plant bending toward a window it couldn't reach. I didn't sleep. By morning I learned they had already booked the flights. They arrived the following Thursday and stayed at a chain hotel near the freeway, which they mentioned twice, as though a hotel room were a gift they were personally giving me. My father hugged me in the lobby like the last 7 years had simply been one long, forgettable weekend. He still smelled like cedar aftershave and drip coffee, and something in my throat did a thing I hadn't authorized. There she is, he said. There's my girl. My mother, Linda, hung back half a step, looked me over head to toe, and her opening line was, "You've gotten so thin. Are you eating enough?" 7 years apart, and the first note struck was about my body. We ended up at a chain Italian restaurant because Paige picked it, and Paige picked everything, and my parents let her, the way water always finds the downhill path. My sister's husband was back home with their daughter, so it was the 4 of us crammed into a vinyl booth, a family portrait with one figure quietly counting the exits. I watched my mother arrange the mood of the table the way you'd arrange centerpieces. She laughed at my father's jokes a half-second early. She told the waiter we were celebrating a family reunion. Brick by brick, she built a scene, and the scene had a shape, and the shape was, nothing ever happened here. No folding chair. No back door. Just 2 sisters and their proud parents and a bottomless basket of bread. And if I said otherwise, I would be the one who ruined it. I recognized the architecture instantly. I'd grown up inside it. What I hadn't expected was how quickly my own hands remembered their old assignment, reaching for the bread basket, refilling water glasses, smoothing, managing, making everything easier for everyone except myself. Old muscle memory. I forced my hands into my lap and kept them there. If you've ever been a guest at your own family's table, you already know exactly how this dinner goes. Stick with me. The conversation had a center of gravity, and the gravity was Paige. Her promotion first, director, my mother said, tasting the word like it was expensive wine. Do you know how many people report to her now? Then came photos of my niece, Sadie, her ballet recital, her reading level, her latest joke. My father asked me exactly one question, whether the winters out here were hard, and before I'd even finished my answer, my mother had pivoted to telling Paige she looked exhausted and should let her husband take more of the load with Sadie. I sat in that booth and felt the temperature of an old, specific feeling settle over me. The one where you go quiet, not because you've run out of things to say, but because you've already learned 100 times over that your sentences don't change the weather in that family. 20 minutes in, I had become garnish. I decided to test the water. Small, careful. I'd rather not spend the whole visit relitigating the past, I said, but I do want to talk about some of it while you're here. A reasonable adult sentence. My mother's smile didn't so much as twitch, but her eyes did. Oh, Maren, she said. We didn't fly all this way to dig up old business. Dig up. As if that folding chair were a body I kept stubbornly insisting on exhuming. My father set his warm, heavy hand over mine on the table and said, "Let's just enjoy tonight, sweetheart." And there it was, the entire family system, delivered in one gesture. Comfort weaponized into a wall. Affection deployed to change the subject. I looked at my sister, half expecting a smirk. Instead, she was watching me with something closer to worry, and that unsettled me far more than a smirk would have. I excused myself to the restroom and stood at the sink until the mirror stopped shaking. I tried one more time in the parking lot afterward, because apparently I'm a slow learner with a stubborn streak. The valet stand sat empty. The freeway hissed somewhere behind us. I just said it, plainly, without raising my voice. "Mom. Do you remember the last Thanksgiving before I moved? You left me a chair by the back door instead of a seat at the table." I wasn't loud. I only wanted to see if the sentence could exist in the open air between us without the whole world caving in. My mother's face did something complicated. For one flickering moment I saw it, something like fear, or maybe just the exhaustion of a woman who has spent 40 years holding a story together with both hands and can't afford to let go of even one corner. Then it sealed shut again. "We're a family," she said. "Families don't keep score." My father muttered, "Carol, it's getting cold," and steered her toward the rental car. Paige touched my arm on the way past and murmured, "She means well, Maren. She really does." And I stood alone in a parking lot in Spokane, 33 years old, and understood, finally, completely, exactly why they had flown out. Not to reckon with the past. To bury it. To fly 1,900 miles and pour a warm dinner over the wound until it went soft and vanished, so the family story could stay smooth, so my mother would never have to actually look at the corner of the blanket she'd been white-knuckling for decades. They didn't want their daughter back. They wanted the record clean. And a clean record required my silence, my forgetting, my hands reaching obligingly for the bread. Accountability had never once been on the table. Only amnesia, served family style. I drove home alone that night. I didn't cry. I just lay awake doing the thing I swore I trained myself out of, wondering what exactly was wrong with me, that being loved required this much editing. The visit ended, but Paige didn't go anywhere, because Paige lived here now. That was the shape of the trap I kept forgetting. Monday morning she was back on my floor with a clipboard and a rollout plan. Patient Experience Initiative, she called it, and it sounded lovely on paper. Underneath the paper was a scalpel with my name already written on the handle. She started shadowing my rounds. She watched me tell a family, honestly and without softening, that their father was not going to wake up, because they deserved to plan the rest of their lives around the truth, not around false hope. Afterward, in the hallway, she said gently, "You're so good with them, Maren. I just wonder if we could soften the delivery a little. Warmth scores matter a lot to the board these days. Soften the delivery." Said kindly, which is exactly how the sharpest versions of this always get said. She wasn't wrong that I'm direct, I am. But that directness had kept families steady in the worst hour of their lives, because I never wasted their time on false comfort. And now my directness had a name on a report, and the name was a deficiency, and the person writing the report shared both my last name and my mother's phone number. I could feel the frame going up around me, plank by plank. Not exactly a lie, a reframe. My precision, which had always been my competence, was quietly getting reclassified as a warmth problem. A culture problem. A Maren problem. And there was nothing solid to grab onto and push back against, because everything she said arrived pre-wrapped in a compliment and a spreadsheet. "I'll take that under advisement," I said. She smiled and wrote something down. I went into the supply closet, pressed my forehead against the cold edge of a metal shelf, and stayed there counting to 10 before going back to work. She left something on my desk one Thursday afternoon, and the entire floor of my childhood dropped out from under me. I came back from a brutal, hours-long code, running on fumes, and there it sat in the charge nurse office, a real ceramic plate, not paper, holding a slice of homemade pie under plastic wrap, and a note in Paige's round, looping handwriting, "Truce. I've missed you more than you know. P. I stood over it and forgot how to breathe correctly. She didn't know. That's what I kept repeating to myself, and it was probably even true. She'd never sat in the folding chair. She had no idea that a plate of food, offered as a gesture of goodwill, was the exact shape of my oldest injury. To her, it was pie. To me, it was the last Thanksgiving, the storm door locked from the inside, the taillights pulling out of the driveway, a paper plate cooling on the back steps while I watched through the glass and understood, in one single image, exactly where I stood in that family. A plate is what you leave outside for someone you never intended to set a place for. You set a place at a table. You leave a plate on the steps. My sister had walked straight into my new life and, without a shred of malice, without even realizing it, recreated the precise gesture that had ended my old one. I didn't eat the pie. I couldn't bring myself to. But I didn't throw the plate away either, and I want you to notice that, because I noticed it later, and it told me something about myself I wasn't ready to hear yet. I peeled back the plastic, scraped the pie into the trash, washed the plate in the break room sink, dried it carefully, and slid it into my bag to take home. I kept the plate. I couldn't have told you why. I only knew I wasn't finished with it. The worst part of that month wasn't Paige. It was Ruth. Ruth Calloway, who'd taught me to start in 4 on a collapsed vein, who'd spent 2 Christmases in a row with me because neither of us had anywhere else to be. She sat down beside me in the break room, patted my knee, and said the sentence. You should give her a real chance, honey. She's your sister. Family's family. I looked at Ruth and felt something I hadn't felt in this building in 6 years, alone. Because Ruth wasn't wrong from where she was sitting. From her seat, a warm, generous woman named Paige had shown up and clearly adored her prickly older sister, and the prickly older sister seemed to be nursing a grudge nobody could quite see the roots of. I had never told Ruth about the folding chair. My entire survival strategy out here had been to arrive as a woman with no backstory at all, clean, competent, and unencumbered. And the price of that clean slate was that when my family's version of events showed up wearing a cardigan and a friendly smile, I had no counter-narrative on file anywhere. Paige had a story and a built-in audience. I had a plate in my bag I couldn't fully explain to anyone. Family's family is a sentence that sounds like love and functions like a padlock. It's the sentence that keeps the scapegoat exactly where the family left her. And now it was coming out of the mouth of the one person here I had actually let all the way in. It's complicated, Ruth, I said. She said it always is, squeezed my knee, and meant every word of it with her whole good heart. And I understood the machinery had reached even here. There was nowhere left in my life the story couldn't follow me. It had a director now. It had a budget. It was recruiting my friends as extras without them ever knowing they'd been cast. Paige brought Sadie to the hospital one afternoon during a teacher workday, and 1 hour with my 7-year-old niece taught me more than a full year of remembering ever had. Sadie was quiet and unnervingly well-behaved. She sat exactly where her mother placed her in the charge office and didn't fidget, didn't ask for a thing. When I offered her a juice box from the fridge, she looked up at me carefully and asked, "Is that okay? Am I allowed?" Something in my chest folded quietly in half. I knew that question. I had invented that question. I had asked some version of it my entire childhood, out loud and silently, at the threshold of every room in that crooked house. Am I allowed to come along? Am I allowed to want things? Am I allowed to take up the amount of space a person is supposed to take up? Sadie was already learning it, in a warm house, from a mother who loved her fiercely. And that was what undid me, because it meant the machinery didn't require a villain at all. It just needed a script, passed hand to hand, mother to daughter, each one certain she was doing right by the next. I crouched down to Sadie's eye level. You're allowed, I told her. The juice is always allowed. You never have to ask me for a drink of water. Not here. Not ever. She studied my face like she suspected a trick. Then she took the juice box with both hands and whispered thank you 3 separate times. Paige came back, scooped her up, and said, "She's just so easy, isn't she? Mommy's easy girl." And kissed the top of her head. Sadie beamed at being called easy. I turned away and pretended to study a monitor that didn't need studying. Mommy's easy one. That's exactly how it starts. Nobody gets left by the back door on the very first try. First you're taught that ease is the entry fee for love. Then, one holiday, somebody tests whether you'll actually pay it. Paige floated the idea to me in the parking garage a week later, casual as a weather report, keys spinning around one finger. I was thinking, we should host Thanksgiving together this year. All of us. Get Mom and Dad back out here. Wouldn't that be something? A real reunion. Thanksgiving. Out of every holiday on the calendar, she reached directly for the one with my body buried under it. She didn't know that. Or she half knew it, the way you half know a bruise is there right before you press down on it. I'll think about it, I said, which is what I say when the real answer is no, but the room still isn't safe enough for me to say it out loud. It would mean so much to Mom, she said. And there was the lever, exactly on schedule. Everything always routed back through what it would mean to our mother, never once through what it had cost me. Never a single sentence acknowledging what that last Thanksgiving had actually done, because in the version of the story my family told itself, that Thanksgiving had simply never happened. And you cannot schedule a healing for a wound the whole family has quietly agreed doesn't exist. I could feel the shape of a larger plan forming now, even though I couldn't yet see its full outline. The visit. The plate. The gentle softening of my performance reviews. The Thanksgiving proposal. Ruth's careful nudging. My parents on standby in Ohio. Pieces were converging towards something, and that something had real gravity, and the gravity wanted me seated at a table, performing a reconciliation that had never actually taken place, so that everyone else in the room could feel healed by proxy. I drove home and set the plate from my desk on my kitchen counter, clean and washed, and looked at it for a long time. I still didn't know exactly what it was for. But I was starting to suspect it wasn't decoration. It was evidence I'd need for what happened at the gala. The hospital's annual staff recognition gala was 3 weeks out, and I learned Paige had landed a spot on the planning committee. Of course she had. It's genuinely a nice event, the one night a year administration puts out a real spread, hands out awards, and pretends the parking situation is manageable. Physicians attend. Board members attend. Sometimes even the local paper sends someone. And this year, word traveled through the hospital grapevine, which moves faster than any medical record system ever built, that the Whitmore family would be attending as personal guests of the director. My parents. Flying back out. For a work event. My work event. I sat with that fact for a long while. Paige had found herself a stage with better lighting than any break room and a bigger crowd than any single unit could offer, and she was arranging for our estranged family to make its public debut on that exact stage, in front of the very people who would soon decide whether I got to run my own ICU. The timing wasn't subtle once you actually looked at it straight on. The manager review panel would meet the same week as the gala. Dr. Whitfield mentioned, almost in passing, that the committee planned to finalize their impressions around then, and impressions inside this building now had an entire department behind them. And that department wore a badge that belonged to my sister, who was staging a family reunion I had never once agreed to, 40 feet from the exact people holding my career in their hands. I understood it then, cold and completely clear. This was never going to be a fight I could win by simply being right. Being right had never been the operating currency in my family. I could be the sharpest nurse in that entire hospital, and it wouldn't matter one bit if, on the night of the gala, I refused to smile for a camera. And I was beginning to suspect that the photograph was the entire point, that the smile was the actual price, and this time, my future had been stapled directly to the receipt. She finally said it plainly, which I almost respected her for. We were sitting in her office, a nice office, with a real window, the kind of office I'd once assumed you earned by working hard enough. She'd called me in to discuss the culture rollout, and after 10 minutes of warm small talk, she leaned back in her chair and said, "You know, the board really does listen to me when it comes to culture fit for the manager role." She let that sentence sit in the air for a moment. "It would help you," she went on, "if we looked united at the gala. Mom and Dad there, all 4 of us, a nice photo. People remember a nice photo. If you're already yelling at your screen to walk away, hold that thought, it costs more than you'd think. Drop a comment on where you'd personally draw the line. Because here's what she was actually offering, translated out of the nice wrapping paper: perform the reunion. Drop the boundary. Be the easy one, on camera. And I'll tell the board you're a culture fit, and you'll get the job you've earned. Refuse, stay difficult, keep your folding chair to yourself, and well, she couldn't promise how the impressions would land. She smiled the entire time she said it. She probably didn't even register it as a threat. In her version of the story, she was helping her sister, extending a bridge, playing the peacemaker she'd always been cast as since childhood. That's exactly what makes the golden child so devastatingly effective as an enforcer. They rarely know they're enforcing anything. They think they're simply hugging you. I looked past her at the window, at her thriving office plants, at the whole urn-looking room, and said, "I'll let you know." Then I walked back to my unit, where the monitors were honest and the stakes were only ever life and death, which, in that moment, felt like a genuine relief. Somewhere in Ohio, my mother was probably already picking out an outfit for the photograph. I tried the honest road first, because I always try the honest road first, and I want you to watch me try it so you understand I didn't leap straight to the difficult choice. I asked Dr. Whitfield for coffee and laid out my case for the manager role: clean, no politics, just the record. My retention numbers. My mortality review outcomes. The 2 new graduate nurses I personally talked out of quitting during their worst weeks. He listened, nodded, and said, "Maren, you are the strongest clinical candidate we have. Full stop." Then he did the thing decent people do right before they tell you a hard truth. He set down his cup. But the panel weighs the culture assessment heavily this cycle. That's Paige's department. I've flagged that the 2 of you are related. I can't make them unhear her. He wasn't apologizing for a wrong he'd committed. He was warning me about a wall he couldn't personally move. And I need you to hold on to that detail, because it's the difference between a story where the narrator is naive and a story where the narrator is simply trapped. I saw the trap clearly. I named the trap out loud. I did the mature, procedural thing and took my case straight to the person with actual power. And it still wasn't enough, not because I was foolish, but because the game had already been rigged one badge above my head, by someone who could recolor my entire professional record with a single word like warmth. The clean road had grown a locked gate on it, and my sister was holding the key, and the key came with a photograph attached. Is there history there? Between you two? Dr. Whitfield asked, kindly, tiredly. I almost told him about 7 years of nobody knowing where I lived. I almost handed the whole thing to a good man over a cup of coffee. I said instead. He waited. I let the silence sit there and didn't fill it. Not yet. My mother called 2 nights before the gala and reached for the softest weapon in her entire arsenal, the one I have never quite learned how to fully block. Maren, honey, that particular voice, the one that reaches straight past 33 and grabs hold of 8, your father and I are just so excited to watch you shine at your work thing. Paige says it's a really big deal. I told her it was fine, nothing to shine at, really. Well, we'll be there, she said. The whole family, together, finally. And then, lower, the actual pitch underneath the pitch, just smile for one night, sweetheart. For your father. He's not getting any younger, and it would mean the world to him. Can you do that for us? One nice night. One nice night. As though I were the one responsible for every night before it turning out unnice. As though the folding chair had simply happened to our family, some passing weather system, and not something done to me on purpose, more than once, by choice. She wasn't really asking me to smile. She was asking me to sign off, in front of a crowd, in a photograph that would outlast every one of us, on the story that we were a close, loving family. That nothing had ever been broken. That the plate on the back steps was something I'd invented. And in exchange, the family would love me for the length of one evening, my sister would tell the board I was warm, I would get to run my unit, and all it would cost me was every true thing I had ever learned about my own life. I need to go, Mom, I said. There's a lot to get ready before the gala. She said, we love you so much, you know that. I said, I know, which wasn't entirely a lie. Then I hung up and stood in my kitchen with the clean plate sitting on the counter and finally understood exactly what it was for. I didn't sleep that night either, but it was a different flavor of sleeplessness. I sat at my kitchen table with the plate in front of me, catching the light off the stove, and I said the old sentence out loud to my empty apartment: there was always room for Paige. For me, there was a chair by the back door. And this time the sentence didn't cut the way it used to. It clarified something instead. Because I finally saw the offer laid out flat on the table next to the plate, exactly for what it was. They weren't finally offering me a seat. They were offering me the same folding chair again, just dressed up nicer this time with my career sitting on top of it as garnish, this time in front of a better dressed crowd. Come back to the family, the offer said. All you have to do is stand by the back door and smile like it's the dining room. Pretend the chair is a place setting. Perform belonging for us, and we'll let you feel a version of it, just for one evening. And I understood, at my own kitchen table, at 33 years old, the thing it had taken an entire lifetime and 1,900 miles to finally reach. A place you have to audition for isn't a place at all. It's just an audition. I had left Ohio thinking I'd quit the audition for good. But I hadn't. I'd only relocated it. For 7 straight years I had kept my apartment spotless and my professional record flawless and my own needs completely invisible. Still auditioning. Still proving I was easy enough to deserve the room. Still performing for a panel that technically wasn't even in the same state anymore. The folding chair had followed me the whole way out here, because I was the one who'd been carrying it. And now my sister was offering me the lead role in the family production one more time. And the strangest, freest thought I'd had in years arrived, quiet as a heart monitor at 3 a.m., I could simply not show up to the audition at all. The gala was held in the hospital's atrium, the good one, with the glass ceiling and the borrowed chandeliers and a string quartet playing something meant to make small talk feel important. I wore the one nice dress I owned and my good shoes, and I walked in already knowing exactly how the night had been scripted, because I had finally read the entire script from beginning to end. My parents were already there. My father wore the single necktie he owned, the one reserved for funerals and weddings, and when he spotted me across the room, his face opened up so genuinely it actually hurt to watch, because his love for me was real. It had simply never once been strong enough to move him to my side of the room. My mother wore navy blue and a hostess's practiced radiance, working a small crowd near the awards table, telling a board member's wife all about her 2 daughters, both in healthcare, in their own way. Isn't that just wonderful? Paige was luminous. She had built this whole evening, and it fit her the way her dress did. She found me inside 90 seconds, took my elbow, and steered me directly toward the cluster of people who mattered: Dr. Whitfield, 2 board members, and the CEO with the famously firm handshake. Everyone, this is my sister, Maren, our ICU charge nurse, honestly the absolute backbone of that unit. Warm, generous, exactly the kind of leader we need more of. Pitched perfectly. And I watched the trap swing shut with something close to admiration, because it really was elegant. In a single sentence, she'd been publicly gracious about me, in front of the precise people, so that if I refused the photograph now, it would look like spite against a sister who just handed me a glowing compliment in public. The board members beamed. My mother drifted over, radiant, slotting herself neatly into the circle. A photographer with a lanyard hovered right at the edge of the group, exactly where he'd been told to stand, because he had been. My niece Sadie was there too, in a small navy dress, holding my father's hand, watching all the adults with those same careful eyes. The lights were warm. The quartet swelled. The stage was set precisely the way I'd known it would be, and every single person in that circle was waiting, without fully realizing it, to see whether I would take my mark. Then a server passed by with a tray of desserts, and Paige, quick and bright, plucked a small plate off it, a slice of something sweet, and held it out to me directly in front of everyone. Here, she said, laughing warmly, playing to the crowd. You never eat enough. Welcome back to the family, sis. A plate, held out to me. In front of the board. In front of my parents. In front of a photographer already lifting his camera to his eye. In front of Sadie. The entire room tilted, almost imperceptibly, toward the photograph everyone could already picture: the reunited sisters, the offered plate, the smile that would end up in the hospital newsletter and live forever after as the official answer to the question of whatever happened to Maren. Take the plate. Smile. Get the job. Be easy. Be loved for one evening. Pay the price I had always been asked to pay. My mother's face glowed with anticipation. My father was already misting up. My sister's arm stayed perfectly steady, the little plate hovering in the air between us like a small warm planet. And I felt the entire gravitational pull of my whole life trying to lift my hand to receive it. Instead, I looked down at Sadie. 7 years old, holding her grandfather's hand, watching her aunt with the exact careful eyes of a child learning, in real time, the going exchange rate of love in this family. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't knock the plate out of her hand. I have stood steady through a coding patient with a family screaming in the doorway behind me. I could stand steady here too. I looked at my sister, then at the plate, and very gently, I let my hands stay right where they were, at my sides. No, thank you, I said, quiet enough that only our small circle could hear it. The photographer's camera came back down, confused. My mother's radiance flickered like a bulb about to blow. The small warm planet of that plate hung in the air with nowhere left to land, and somewhere 1900 miles and 25 years away, a crooked house finally, quietly, came down. Paige's smile stayed up a beat too long, the particular way a smile lingers when the person behind it is frantically recalculating. Maren, she said, softer now, stepping in close enough that the rest of the circle couldn't hear. Don't do this here. Please. Just take the plate. My mother closed in on my other side, still smiling for the room, her voice dropping into a hiss beneath the string quartet. Maren Kessler. Do not embarrass this family. Not here. Not in front of these people. And there it was, the entire mechanism, finally undressed. The fear was never about losing me. It was about the photograph. It was about the crowd. It was about the story staying smooth. I kept my own voice level and aimed it only at the two of them. I know exactly what this is, I said to Paige. The photo, and then a good word to the board. I'm not trading my life for a job title. And since apparently that's what the job is stapled to now, I'm withdrawing from the manager search. I'll tell the panel myself tomorrow. Paige's face went pale. You'd really throw it away, she whispered. Just to spite us? That was the exact moment I could have let myself get angry. I didn't, because I finally understood I wasn't spiting anyone at all. I was simply walking out of an audition I'd been standing inside since I was 8 years old. I'm not spiting you, I said. I'm just done paying the entry fee. My mother's composure cracked. For one true second, I saw all the way down to the bottom of it. A frightened woman who had spent her entire adult life earning her own comfort by keeping everyone else's story smooth. A woman who had left a plate outside a door because that was the exact arithmetic she'd been taught, subtract the difficult one, and the picture stays warm. I nearly felt the old pull to comfort her, to smooth it over, to reach for the bread basket one more time. Instead, I said the sentence I'd been carrying across the country for 7 years. You told me once that families don't keep score, Mom. I looked at her, not unkindly. You're right. I'm not keeping score anymore. I'm keeping distance. And then, to all of it, to the folding chair and the back door and the 25 years, quiet enough that only the three of us heard it, a place you have to earn isn't a place. It's an audition. And I'm done auditioning. I set my untouched water glass down on the nearest table and walked out of that circle, past the confused photographer, past my father's tears, out into the cold, clean night air of the parking lot. I did not look back to see the photograph I'd refused to be part of. I sat in my car in the parking garage for a long time, waiting for the panic to arrive, the old familiar dread of having been difficult, of having ruined the picture, of the punishment that always used to follow a no. It never came. What arrived instead was quiet. I had just walked away, in front of the exact people who could have given me the job I wanted, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, I didn't feel like I was being graded on anything. That's when I finally understood what I'd actually done. It was never really about Paige, or the board, or even the plate itself. For 7 years I had genuinely believed leaving Ohio had set me free. But I had brought the audition with me the entire time. I had kept performing for an empty panel, kept my life immaculate, my needs invisible, my edges sanded down, still trying to prove I was easy enough to deserve the room I was already standing in. Walking out of that circle wasn't actually the bravest thing I'd ever done. It was simply the first time I stopped performing a belonging I had never truly been given, and let myself belong to myself instead. The folding chair didn't lose its power over me that night because I finally won my family's approval. It lost its power because I stopped needing their approval to feel whole. My hands stayed steady on the wheel the entire drive home. Somewhere above me, the gala carried on, the quartet still playing, my mother no doubt already rewriting the moment into a version of the story where I was simply cold and she was simply blameless, because that particular story is the only house she knows how to live inside. Let her keep it. I wasn't a room in that house anymore. I withdrew from the manager search the next morning, in writing, before I had a chance to talk myself out of it. The position went to a solid, decent nurse from the cardiac floor, someone who will do the job well and never once had to sell any part of herself to get it. I stayed on as charge nurse in the ICU I loved, on the unit I had built, among the monitors that still spoke a language only I seemed fluent in. Dr. Whitfield stopped me in the hallway the following week and didn't ask a single question about what had happened at the gala. He just said, "Whatever that was, you did the right thing." It showed. A month later, he asked me to design and run a brand new nurse residency program for the entire hospital, my curriculum, my name attached, built entirely around the same honest, unsoftened teaching my sister had once tried to file down into something smaller. It wasn't a consolation prize, and it wasn't charity. It was the clean, natural consequence of being someone people had learned they could trust, offered to me by a man who never once needed me to perform anything in order to earn it. My parents flew home to Ohio. My mother and I have not repaired anything, not really. She still believes I humiliated her that night, and she tells a version of the story in which the folding chair never existed, because that version is the only room she can still afford to live inside. I've stopped trying to renovate it for her. That old force didn't die because I finally stood up to it. It simply lost its grip on me. But here's the part one never saw coming. 3 weeks after the gala, a large envelope arrived from Ohio, addressed in careful, uneven child's handwriting. Inside was a drawing from Sadie, 2 stick figures seated at a table, one tall, one small, and in front of each figure, drawn carefully in brown crayon, a plate exactly the same size as the other. Both figures at the table. No back door anywhere in the picture. On the back, in Paige's handwriting, one short line, she drew this completely on her own. And underneath that, in smaller letters, like it had cost her something to write, "I've been thinking about the plates. P. I don't know if my sister will ever manage to climb all the way out of the warm house she was raised to protect. Golden children rarely do, the house is comfortable, and leaving it means finally admitting the folding chair was real the whole time." But she had noticed. And her daughter, 7 years old, had already drawn a table with both places set, entirely unprompted, because one ordinary afternoon a blunt aunt told her she was allowed to want things, that she didn't have to ask permission for a glass of water, that she didn't have to be easy in order to be loved. That's exactly where the chain finally breaks. Not in the ones who were carefully taught the old arithmetic. In the ones who never learn it in the first place. I put Sadie's drawing on my refrigerator, right beside the clean plate I finally understood, and I stopped waiting for the family I was born into to set a place for me. I used to believe love was a table you had to earn your way back to. It isn't. It's a plate someone sets down for you before you ever have to ask. A cold one, left outside on the back steps. Or a warm one, waiting on your own desk. It took me 7 years to learn the difference between the two. If you've ever drawn a boundary and been told it was cruelty, simply because your family had always called it that, you already know exactly how heavy that plate can feel. And you already know how light your hands become the moment you finally set it down for good. This channel is for you. Subscribe, and I'll see you in the next story.